Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gracefully Graying. As always, visit our YouTube channel by searching Gracefully Graying and visit our website, gracefullygraying.com, for constant content that we're uploading pretty much every day. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am pleased to welcome Scott Cooper, an attorney with Fragomen, as he discusses issues impacting immigrants or their family members as they are aging. So welcome, Scott. We're happy to have you on Gracefully Graying.
Well, thanks, Lori. I'm very pleased to join you today and to talk about these issues. Many people believe that immigration issues are usually in the rearview mirror for people who are aging. But there are actually a number of them that pop up, and we see this very frequently.
So tell us about some of the issues that immigrants are facing now. And I know, it's kind of a controversial time as far as this topic is concerned.
It is. It's a time where our country is kind of rethinking its immigration policy. And what do we do with immigrants? How many should we let in, and what kinds? And but for those that are aging, you don't have to be Melania Trump's parents to get sponsored in nowadays. But there's actually a number of issues, and so I guess I'd address some of the more common questions I encounter. And again, they're from U.S. citizens, they're from people who are have green cards or permanent residents in the U.S., and even some temporary visa holders who are aging and come up with all kinds of questions. Oops, I'm going to have to get my...
What do we have here?
Yeah, this is Oliver. He's one of my main coons. They like to get on your lap. Sorry about that.
Is Oliver an immigration specialist?
Well, he actually immigrated from Thailand. When I was in Dubai, we found a breeder in Thailand, a Russian national, famous for her Maine Coons, and Oliver's one of actually 3 that we've adopted from her. So he's an international traveler, which brings me actually to one of the questions that comes up. I get somebody who says, I'm retired now, and I'd like to visit these kind of far-flung places on my bucket list, right? Some of them, am I going to have any immigration problems? Well, you're not really immigrating to these places. What you're doing is you're just visiting. And U.S. citizens and permanent residents of the U.S. usually can travel and enter many of popular countries without having to get a visa in advance, or sometimes at a port of entry. They're processed, but it depends on how, where you want to go. Some people are really adventurous. They want to go to countries that are not the usual tourist places. There might be some areas that are sometimes countries of concern, but nonetheless, they like to do it. You might want to do it, for example, with Habitat for Humanity, who helps with their visas. But they have to look to make sure before they're booking their trips, not just what kind of immunizations they ought to have for these countries, but also, there are visitor visa requirements. And so that comes up to the surprise sometimes of U.S. citizens, but that's actually a common question we often get. I think a lot of retired or people who are more set in, at the end of life, sometimes and they may not even be here, frankly. They might be abroad, but they're U.S. citizen children who came here, established a life. They want to bring their parents in, and so they want to sponsor their parents. And this is not just an immigration issue. When I sit down with a client like that, and he might be head of a business, and mom and dad are getting a little old. They can't really come on those visitor visas anymore. They want to bring them here. They want to be with the family, see the grandchildren. And so they want to sponsor them. And it's certainly a U.S. citizen can sponsor parents into the U.S. Again, Melania being an example of that. But there's a number of issues. Yes, you have to process them for a green card, sponsor them for permanent residence, and that can take a year and a half, maybe 2 years to bring them in. But also, they have to think of some other issues. Do they really want to come? Or do they just want to visit? Don't get somebody a green card just to visit, because guess what? They're going to pay U.S. taxes on their worldwide income then, and that's probably not what your parents want.
Right.
What they have to do.
how would they then say, yes, I really do want to come other than visiting? Like, how would they explain their way to that?
Well, you mean for the parents or
right,
the
like
individual? Yeah. I mean, the parents, they just have to really, they want to take into account, do they really want to do more than visit? Do they really want to separate from the home country? Are they going to miss their family, their culture back home? When they come to the U.S., will they be able to spend the time that they really should be spending with their children? We've got two income families, parents are out, or are they just going to become babysitters for their grandchildren, or be isolated, frankly? They won't have their cultural contacts. Yes, they can Zoom and they can call and all that, but you want to think about those kinds of issues when you're going to sponsor some parents over. And also, the sponsoring children take on a financial obligation for those parents, so that if they do reach out for any government benefits, so supplemental security income, something like that, the sponsoring children may be responsible to the federal government for those costs. And finally, they really have to think about health care. If they want to bring them over because maybe they're not doing so well health-wise, well, they're bringing them into one of the most expensive healthcare systems in the world. Can they get health insurance for them? These are all the things they should think about before sponsoring somebody over like that.
Right. Yeah, obviously a lot of issues. And so, you're talking about going both ways. You're talking about kids sponsoring their parents from wherever they are coming here to the U.S. and and the other way around. So talk about some of those financial, if a kid wanted to bring their senior parents from wherever, what kind of how much does a sponsorship cost? I mean, what does that involve?
Well, what they do is they sign a legally enforceable affidavit of support as part of their sponsorship process and paperwork, so that the federal government can get recourse from the sponsoring U.S. citizen children if their parents do access certain forms of federal assistance or state assistance. The other issue now is, and under the current administration, is that before they're going to issue a permanent resident visa, a U.S. consular officer in that country where they're immigrating from has to look very closely to see whether or not there's a likelihood that these parents are going to have to accept government assistance or become what we call a public charge. And there's an enormous amount of documentation that they have to present. They have to have all these assets declared. Imagine your parents trying to get a credit report. They've never been here. You can't get that. So there are a lot of paperwork, a lot of obligations there. And the parents really have to understand that when they come and when they get their green cards and come here, and they may have substantial assets in the home country, they should first dispose of those assets before they get the green card, because, for example, if they sell a home, the gain on that home, on the sale of the home, is taxable from a U.S. standpoint. So there is some careful tax planning involved. And one of the things I tell somebody who's going to sponsor a parent or a parent sponsoring children is, get thee to your accountant and somebody who knows something about foreign national taxation. And sometimes it requires a tax specialist who can analyze not just their potential U.S. tax liability, but also the taxes in the home country. It's really, both countries have tax systems have to be looked at as part of that analysis.
Right. So could a person get their parents a green card just to come visit, and how long would that be? But then they go back. I mean, I'm sure that happens. But explain. It happens,
and it's a common mistake, actually. Parents will say, "Oh, I want to visit, but I'm tired of applying for the visa at the U.S. consulate, the trouble of going into the city to that consul and the interview and all of that. Why do I have to do that?" Or the children say, "No, we'll get you a green card, and you just come over and visit once a year with that. Come for a couple months, that'll be fine. You'll just present the green." No, very bad idea. Mm-hmm. Because, first of all, somebody who gets a green card need to spend a majority of their time in the United States. And if they're not, Customs and Border Protection officials may determine at any entry that they've abandoned permanent residence. So they can lose the green card altogether at a port of entry, especially after all the trouble and cost of getting it for them. Why risk losing it unless they're going to stay at least half the year in the United States? The other thing is that, again, the parent, you get them a green card, their worldwide income becomes subject to U.S. taxation. So that nice little retirement back in the home country is going to be taxed by the U.S. government. You don't want that to happen. Your parents aren't going to be happy. I've had cases where the parents say, they can have the green card. I'm coming as a visitor. So it's something that the sponsoring individual really has to take into account.
Right. And what if, parents come over, but they have kids that are in the U.S., say, living in different states? I mean, can they go visit one kid and then go visit another kid? And it gets complicated,
sure.
Right?
Oh, it can be. But if they have a visitor visa and it's valid and a valid passport, once they enter the U.S., they can go anywhere they want. In fact, they could even, visit the kids in Detroit, and then let everybody go on a nice vacation to Puerto Rico or Hawaii, which are U.S. states or possessions, and they don't have to have a visa for any of those areas. So, okay.
Now, here's a question: if somebody wants to move back to, say, a family estate in the south of France, can he or she just expatriate from the U.S. or abandon his or her green card?
Well, other than coming back up to speed on your French to survive in the countryside there, yes, if somebody's going to leave, and we do see retiring executives or other individuals who say, it's been nice living here in New York, but it's crazy. I do want to go back to the south of France, or I want to go back to Milano or wherever. So I can just, what if I just hand in my green card? Or I'm a U.S. citizen. Maybe I just want to expatriate. I'm tired of these U.S. taxes. I'm tired of U.S. politics. I want to go. Well, first of all, expatriating from the U.S. is a big deal. It requires at least a couple interviews with U.S. consular officers. If they deem that you're expatriating for tax purposes, they'll tax you for another 10 years beyond that. And you could be barred from reentry to the U.S. A long-time permanent resident faces a lot of the same issues. That is, when they abandon the green card, and they do it by simply handing it in with a form at a U.S. consul or at a port of entry, that abandonment, the IRS is going to look at all of their assets in the U.S., put a valuation on them, and then tax them. It's like an exit tax. So there has to be some very careful tax planning before somebody does something like that. Somebody who's expatriating also has to think, first of all, if I'm going to go to another country, I think I need another citizenship. And you can get those. You can go to Grenada and some other countries, and for a relatively small investment, yes, you can become a citizen of another country. You'd have to do that first. But some individuals returning back home, say to Germany, when a German national becomes a U.S. citizen, they first go through a process with the German government. The German government says, that's okay, you can become a U.S. citizen because you have enough ties to Germany, you can retain your German nationality. Because a lot of people don't understand that you can have more than one nationality. So if your grandparents were Italian or Irish, you can get that Italian or Irish passport and you don't lose your U.S. citizenship. But what if you want to lose U.S. citizenship? You have to be careful about the process and all of that. Again, taxes are important, but also other issues related to family and being able to see them and all that. So it's a complex matter to abandon.
And recently, within the last few years, there have been people talking about, I just want to leave the United States. My great-great-grandfather was from Austria, and I really want to get Austrian citizenship so that I can go live in the EU and just be done with the US. I mean, like what? So explain that. I mean, it's not so easy, obviously.
No, and acquiring another nationality, and yes, many countries, I mean, if you look back to part of the immigration discussion here in the U.S. is what we call chain migration. Somebody gets their green card or citizenship, and then they start sponsoring other family members. And I'll leave Melania and her parents out of this for a second. But they want to, you know, and why are we accepting so many people? Well, actually, the U.S. is pretty restrictive where it comes to family sponsorship. You can sponsor your spouse, you can sponsor your children, you can sponsor your siblings, but that's it. No uncles, no aunts, no grandparents, and all of that. Similarly, for citizenship, we're even more restrictive in that if your parents aren't U.S. citizens or you're not born to at least one U.S. citizen, you have to become a citizen through what we call naturalization, as if somebody who's not yet a citizen is unnatural. But we call it naturalization, and it's a process of applying for U.S. citizenship. They must have lived in the U.S. for a certain number of years, like 5 years typically. And then you have to be physically present in the U.S. at least half that time. You can't have long absences because that breaks that period of residence for citizenship purposes. And then you have to know some measure of the English language and
right.
U.S. history.
There's
and
the whole language component, which we haven't really talked about.
If you're aging though, if you're older, the law does allow some variance for those for older people, so that they don't necessarily have to take the English examination or the U.S. history and civics exam, which frankly has been revised for a second time now by this administration, by the current administration, and it's not a very easy test.
Okay, wait, stop. So, like, what grade level would you equate that to? Like, what? I think a lot of people don't know about that.
It's I'll just relate a short story, and that is one time my daughter, who was then in 5th grade, I offered to provide a little class for the 5th graders in her school about U.S. history and especially about the Constitution and about about citizenship. And so we ended up just one class. We focused on citizenship issues. And one of the things I did was I gave them some of the questions from, we went through, and I taught them certain aspects. And then I gave them a test. And it was a few of the questions that related to what I told them, which were normally on the citizenship examination, like how many colors are there in the flag, and what are the stripes in the flag, and the stars represent. And they did pretty well with it. It was very nice. And then several of the students took the questions home and asked their parents the questions. And the parents apparently didn't do so well. And my future classes were canceled at the school as a result of complaints by the parents. So it is not an easy exam, and I would lay a fair wager that many here born here in the U.S. simply could not pass the test. Either they weren't listening or didn't care when they learned U.S. government or history in grade school. And it's changed a lot, so it's not an easy test.
Yeah. Okay. Talk to us about the eligibility to receive Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all that in regards to the green card.
Sure. And this relates to what I mentioned earlier about the public charge issue, because those requirements have been strengthened here in the U.S. right now, so that if somebody does accept certain types of government assistance, we might often call welfare, that they can lose their green card. They could be removed from the United States for failing for becoming a public charge. And so we get a lot of questions. Well, gee, can I accept this? Can I accept that? Somebody who has been paying into Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and can receive those benefits, if they're a permanent resident or citizen of the U.S., they can receive those government benefits, and it does not result in their removal from the U.S. It's not the kind of government assistance that a problem, because those are earned benefits, just like unemployment compensation. Question comes up, I'm here on a visa or I'm here on a green card. Can I accept unemployment compensation? Of course, it's a paid benefit. The employer paid into the system, so they can receive that, and there isn't any issue.
Right. Okay. So, and then going reverse. I mean, if somebody's here and they want to apply for U.S. citizenship, but they still want to go back home and visit a little bit, I mean, are they allowed to do that?
Of course. Of course. And while the application's pending, they can travel. And since it takes nowadays about 2 years for such an application to process, and that's on top of the usual 5-year waiting period. So it takes when somebody gets permanent residence, because nobody comes here on a visa and gets citizenship right away. The undocumented who come here can't vote until they get U.S. citizenship, and there's this first step of getting permanent residence, or usually called a green card. So once they get that, when they're applying and file the application, they can travel in the meantime. Doesn't stop it. And also, when they become a U.S. citizen, again, it doesn't prevent them from going to the home country. Now, they might lose the nationality in their home country, and there are many countries, Australia being one of those. Again, I mentioned Germany. If they don't go through a process with the German government beforehand, they can lose German nationality, or China, for example. Many countries do deem that an individual who's become a U.S. citizen has expatriated from their home country citizenship. So always look at that issue too. You might lose inheritance rights. You might lose property ownership or business interests in a country if you lose nationality in that country. But visiting usually isn't an issue. But just going back to what we first talked about, which is you might have to get a visa, even though you were a citizen of that country before. You're going to be treated like you never had the citizenship generally, and you may have to get a visitor visa.
And how long does that take to get?
For most countries, visitor visas applications are fairly quickly processed. Now, this is pre-COVID. Here, COVID has changed lives in many ways, but from an immigration standpoint, there are very significant changes, and this happens on a daily basis. In fact, our firm's website at Fragomen.com, we have a mini website in there which shows the immigration and health restrictions in going to visit countries now. Talks about the visiting visa requirements. It talks about health requirements. One of the most stringent jurisdictions is actually just to the north of us. We like to, Detroiters, once in a while, we want to go over to that Windsor casino. The problem is if you can't enter a land border into Canada for tourist reasons now. There's a restriction on that. Same thing with Canadians coming to the U.S. There's no land border entries for recreational or non-essential purposes.
But they can fly here from Canada.
You can fly in
to the U.S. via
that.
Yeah.
That's right. So you could fly into lovely Windsor Airport and then drive back down to the casino, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But for an American citizen, or for anybody entering Canada, whether a Canadian citizen or not, with few exceptions, if you enter Canada, you are required to quarantine, a residential quarantine, for 14 days. And that has to be part of your arrangements when you're going to enter Canada. No stop at the McDonald's on the way. You have to go right to the residential quarantine.
Right.
So keep in mind, not just immigration requirements, but the health requirements too. And those are on our website for about 150 countries. Right.
And there are fines attached to that, correct?
Yes. If somebody fails to, for example, if you're going to Canada and you're required to do the 14-day quarantine and you don't do it, it's a $1,000 fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So recently, well, I don't know if you want to discuss pre-COVID or during, not really during COVID, but pre. I mean, what has been the general? Where have people been coming from? Where are they going? What do you see, like trends, or what's happening with that?
It's very complex. Again, we do see in our hospitality industry a drop in international tourists to the U.S., especially now. The U.S. is a hot spot for COVID, and so that discourages a lot of recreational travel. And recreational travel internationally has been impacted very significantly. But also the U.S. has implemented restrictions on individuals coming from certain countries. For example, someone who's been in China or the Schengen area in Europe or the UK or Ireland or Brazil or Iran, if they've been in one of those countries in the past 14 days, they cannot enter the United States. So there are those restrictions. Also, the current administration has implemented rules to limit the number of highly skilled workers who can come into the U.S., even if U.S. employers have petitioned for them and gone through the requirements to be able to hire a highly skilled worker, or say a multinational company has an executive or manager they need to transfer to the U.S. Those have been generally restricted since last June, with some exceptions for very senior personnel or personnel where a very significant financial interest in the companies involved, or where our national interest dictates it. For example, healthcare workers to come to the United States to help institutions keep up with the ever-increasing load of COVID patients. So there are some exceptions, but as a general rule, we've restricted a number of temporary people coming. And since last April, no new immigrants have been able to come to the United States, whether they're family-sponsored, employment-sponsored. There's been a hold on all of those.
Mm-hmm. And that might change, and probably will, in the new administration. I mean, speak to that.
Well, I think the administration, especially its focus, initial and significant focus on the pandemic, I would guess that some of these restrictions will remain for some time. But the administration really needs to balance that against the restrictions, especially on employment-related immigration for highly skilled workers or these executives or managers, because these are people who come in and create jobs in the U.S. There's kind of a perception that foreign workers just fill U.S. worker jobs. But that, in my over 40 years of practice in this area, it's just not the case for two reasons. One is that the U.S. does not produce enough workers, especially in science, technology, engineering, and math, or what we call the STEM fields, so that many of the foreign nationals, many of them are trained right here at our schools.
Right. Well, that was my
and yet they can't remain.
Right. So that was, this affects universities, colleges, students coming from abroad and studying in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And so it's really that we don't produce enough ourselves. The National Science Foundation has had studies on this for years showing that. Secondly, when these individuals come to the U.S., they create jobs because they buy homes, they shop like everybody else, they spend money, and that's economic activity. For example, just the international students who are here in the U.S. create tens of billions of dollars of economic benefit through their spending, whether it's tuition, whether it's living costs. So there's a significant benefit to international students. And of course, the whole international exchange effort, whether it's students or scholars, really promotes the U.S. Throughout the world as people learn about American culture and meet Americans, so that we can overcome some of the negative images of the United States. So those are important programs for that purpose as well.
Right. So I hate to say it, but we've run out of time and you've covered a lot of information. What are just some final, very quick thoughts, 10 seconds for the 50 and over crowd regarding immigration?
Well, just think in terms, and I think for the majority of your listeners, do things like international travel, family-sponsored immigration, and the issue of receipt of public benefits are things to think about, not just from an economic or a convenience standpoint, but there can be immigration aspects. And, just keep an eye on those, keep those in mind, and make sure you get good advice before you engage in those activities. Lori, thanks so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciated being able to share this information. And looking at Gracefully Grain is really a terrific resource for so many people. I think it's a great effort.
Thank you. And you know, this was a great interview. You know, I learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers will also. And we really appreciate you joining us today. So thank you. And thank you to our viewers for watching. Again, see us on YouTube by searching Gracefully Graying, and visit thegracefullygraying.com, our website, share your stories, look at our content. And thanks again, Scott, for joining us.
Thank you.